Where's Gilman Wakefield? Where's Gilman Wakefield? Gilman Wakefield. Where's Gilman Wakefield?
It's on this map, Joe.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. My name is Carrie Novak. I'm the chairperson of Templeton's Open Space Committee, and I'd like to thank the Outer River Sportsman Club for hosting us here tonight. It's a very nice facility. So what we're doing tonight is we are going to look at a draft or some of the workings of the proposed open space plan that's being developed by three esteemed graduate students of the Conway School of Landscape Design. Templeton gave a contract to the school to update our open space plan. So they've been working on it for a little while and have some preliminary recommendations. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to kind of look at where they are so far, get some input, further input on other things that we would like to see, and also to get feedback on some of the findings and some of the recommendations that they have for our town. And I will let them introduce themselves and take it away. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Carrie. So as Carrie, I'll start off by saying I'm Emma Botour.
I'm Colin Charlie.
I'm Katie Dwyer Hooper.
And as Carrie said, that we're from the Conway School, and it is a 10-month graduate program in sustainable landscape design and planning. So we're partnering with the town to work on this update of the open space and recreation plan. And the purpose of tonight is to really share information. So we appreciate you moving around the stations as you walked in. Our goal is to really get information from you and to share a little bit of information about what we've been working on so far. So we'll first go through a little presentation. For those of you less familiar with an OSRP, we'll talk about what that is. Review the goals that we established from our first community meeting. Go over some of our process and our analyses that we've been working on to develop the plan. And then talk about some of the criteria or the qualities for consideration when making future decisions about protecting open spaces. So we'll do a little bit of an activity around that, and then go into talking about our draft recommendations for the plan. And then end with a discussion. So at the end, we'd really just like to go around and hear what your 20-year vision is for Templeton. So think of like a word or a sentence, something that you'd really like to see for your town. And make any notes. So you all should have gotten a handout as you came in the door.
Is anyone missing one? Everybody have this handout?
And so that just has the agenda, our contact information on the front. As you leave, you can rip off the front page and take that with you. If you have any questions or comments later, you can contact us. It has our contact information on the front. The second page are instructions for the activities, and on the very back page is a comment box. So feel free to make notes throughout the evening, and we'll collect that from you before you leave. So if you don't contribute something verbally, we'll get those notes from you anyway.
So we've been spending some time thinking about town character. And the character of a town can be defined in many ways. And it can unify townspeople and give them a sense of place. So in this first slide here, here's Salem, Massachusetts. They really identify with the history of Salem and the spectacle of Halloween. Here's Kenmore Square in Boston. They are really proud of the sports teams. And then the last one is Wellfleet, which really identifies with the fisheries. And here in Templeton, character seems to come from, or we're exploring where it comes from, but farms passed down through generations, the freedom to seek refuge and recreation in beautiful waters, activities of the Sportsman's Club, or just hanging out at the Sportsman's Club, and the historical town common. And so we have been exploring town character in Templeton. And we're going to share a bit of what we found, both from the first meeting and then in our research so far, and really think with you about how an open space and recreation plan can help plan for the future of what the town's character might be like in 20 years.
So an open space and recreation plan is a planning tool that can help Templeton do that. It's a planning document that summarizes the natural resources and the cultural resources of a town, and then a town's goals for maintaining those resources into the future. Planners like ourselves go through a process of gathering community input and environmental analysis, and then a 7-year action plan is put together that then is carried out by various town committees, and that allows the town to apply for certain grants. It's also really helpful in identifying stakeholders in the protection of open space.
Yeah, so between 2000 and 2010, there was a real estate boom, and the population in Templeton rose 17.9%. And so your landscape changed pretty fast with a lot of subdivisions and single-family housing. And Templeton had no zoning before 2006. So in response to the boom, the zoning bylaws were put into place, and that kind of directed growth to the more densely populated northeast. And there's a simplified version of your zoning map on the left, and you can see that in the light green on the bottom that it has a minimum lot size of 2 acres. The blue area in the northwest has a minimum lot size of 5. And then the tan area has a minimum lot size now of 1 acre. And the village centers are the most densely populated, and they're zoned for mixed use. And the purple and yellow are for commercial business. And so now the growth is directed to those areas, and that's a good first step to prevent sprawl, but and also to protect special community assets like farmlands and critical habitat. But now more thoughtful planning is needed so that you don't lose open space areas and access to the river in those more densely populated areas. So and during the last community meeting, residents of Templeton said they want to be prepared for the next wave of development.
So we can pretty much see Templeton as at a crossroads where on one hand, planning could preserve rural character, and on the other, not planning, you might lose the character that people love.
Yeah, so we also took a tour of Templeton, and we noticed that Templeton has many resources and assets, and we noticed that there were beautiful old farms in the south, historic sites, and some of these are protected open spaces, and the public does have some access, but there are others that are privately owned and could be lost to development. So we're here to find out what properties the community does not want to lose. And then we also noticed that there are 4 distinct villages in Templeton, and they all have separate needs and opportunities. And so we want to hear from the community what their vision of these villages is, and what ways open space could enhance these areas. And then we also noticed that there was beautiful scenic views up by the Templeton Development Center. There's beautiful ponds and riverways, and so we wanted to know what are the most important places to protect for wildlife, for education, for recreation, and what properties the public needs for more access to.
So I'll just go over some of the goals that we talked about during the first community meeting. And these are not set in stone, they're still being worked on. So as we go through this evening, if you have ideas about the goals that should be added, please write those down. The first goal that we talked about was to preserve rural and historic character. The second was to improve access and availability of recreational opportunities. The Blue River Rail Trail, which is pictured there, was a result of the last OSRP. Thirdly, protect natural resources, including wildlife, water resources, and rare species. There are many ecological resources, as you might have been able to observe from the maps as you walked in. Fourth, accommodate growth where the environment can best support it. So that had a lot to do with what Pauline was talking about with zoning. And fifth, work with neighboring communities and connect protected areas and collaborate towards open space goals. So there's a summary of the 5 goals, and these are a work in progress.
So as part of the environmental analysis of Templeton, it's important to take stock of the protected open space that already exists in town. And so open space, we use this word and we mean more than an open field. We also mean forests and parks. Also it could be sites that are historic in nature. And so in the northwest corner, there's a lot of this dark gray. This is these are the protected open spaces, and this is protected in perpetuity. So there's a concentration in the northwest, as well as along both southern sides by the tip. And in particular, on these southern sides, you can see that protected land in Templeton connects with protected land in adjacent towns. There is not so much around the areas where the villages are located. And so looking at resources in the villages we think is important. And then thinking about protecting missing puzzle pieces between the Templeton lands in the south and adjoining town lands. The reason that we didn't include the chapter lands, which are the lightest gray, which might even be hard to see, is because we'll give you a little sense of what this means. Is Chapter 61 is part of the Massachusetts General Law, and it's a tax incentive that gives private landowners a tax break if they're using their lands for open space purposes, like agriculture, forestry, and making it available to people for recreation. But this incentive is only in shorter term durations, and so we're not including that as protected open space. So we heard from people in the last community meeting that folks in Templeton really value the beauty and the biodiversity of the landscape. And so to pass that legacy on to generations, we want to take a look at the ecological integrity of the lands today.
So to begin doing that, to look at the ecological resources in Templeton, we began with a conservation planning effort called Biomap 2, and they use mapping data to look at critical natural landscapes, which are intact ecosystems, as well as core habitat, which is habitat for threatened species. We also included interior forests, because some wildlife species rely on unfragmented habitats. And we think that all of these, we're proposing that all of these are ecologically valuable for protection, for the resources themselves, but also for the sake of ecological connectivity, which is important for maintaining ecosystem processes as a whole and movement of species throughout the landscape. So when we think about movement of species through the landscape, we're thinking about structural connectivity of the landscape in the form of either the wildlife corridors or patches to make it easier for species to move. And that will become increasingly important as we face climate change. So the resource, this is a map of those ecological resources that I've been talking about. And these, maybe we could hit the lights in the back. There's but we found that there are a lot of resources north and south of Templeton, core habitat, interior forest, and critical natural landscapes. Birch Hill to the north has a lot of wetlands and forests. The Quabbin Reservoir to the southwest has a lot of core habitat. And then there are large patches to the southeast. And if we lump all of those together into one, you can see how protection of land around the edges of Templeton could contribute to the ecological health of the region. And then we also noticed that there were fewer resources identified in the center of Templeton, and that's probably largely due to the fact that Route 2 runs directly through that area. And we think that maybe the town might consider in the future how ecological connectivity could be improved through such a heavily human-modified landscape. So now we're going to zoom in to a more local level and look at some of the ecological resources.
Yeah, so this is, you can probably see it, yeah, the superficial geology of Templeton. And in the yellow is all the glacial outwash deposits from the last glacier, and they deposited sand and gravel in the low-lying valleys. And these deposits in Templeton store water, and they support many bogs and wooded swamps and marshes, and rare and uncommon species live there. And these are some of the species that live in Templeton that are endangered or of special concern. And in the map, you can see in the purple are the areas that have high levels of biodiversity. And then this has the protected space overlaid on the map, so you can see in purple the areas that are unprotected right now. And so protecting these areas of critical habitat should be a priority, and expanding and linking these areas would maintain overall ecological health, as Emma talked about, and it creates more resilient habitats and helps to ensure that the rare species will persist. And then this is a more simplified version that shows that the largest unprotected core habitat area in Templeton is near the border of Gardner, near the airport.
So Colleen's talked about the wealth of wetland resources, but are there any resources underground in Templeton? Yes, so there are 2 aquifers and 4, yeah, so that pink is like the glacial outwash area that Colleen talked about. So there's 2 aquifers, and then if you go ahead, there's 4 wells that a quarter of residents are getting their public drinking water from. And there's 2 Birch Hill wells, and then the Otter River and Sawyer Street well. And going, this pink zone is the well protection zone, sometimes called the aquifer recharge zone, and it's been scientifically determined as the area where rain falls on the ground. It will trickle down through the particles of sand and gravel and end up eventually in the aquifer. So it's an area to think about, what's happening on land and could it affect the aquifer. And in this particular aquifer, the clay impermeable layer is underneath the aquifer. So if there were any contaminants in water that's trickling through the sand and gravel, there's nothing to block them from going into the aquifer water. And so DEP has designated these aquifers as high susceptibility or high vulnerability to contaminants. So if you go ahead one, we looked at some land uses, not all land uses, within this aquifer protection zone. And the orange spots include commercial, industrial, waste disposal, junkyards, and sand and gravel land uses. And these could have a potential to affect water quality. And so that's their distribution within the well protection zone. So sand and gravel mines are important to Templeton. I think they're the largest employer currently. And you can see them in the sandy whitish patches. And if you go ahead a slide, they follow this corridor of Trout Brook and the Otter River. And so they are within that well protection zone. And then if you go ahead, another slide. Might be a little hard to see, but the Otter River is coming along, and then it forms the border with Gardner. And according to data from a study in 2003, the water quality becomes impaired. It's this red just after it becomes a border with Gardner. And some of the reasons cited are PCB contaminations in the northern part, sort of the northern half as it goes up toward through Baldwinville. So that's from a legacy of the mills, and then excessive sedimentation, which could come from different sources and could be an ongoing input. So you can see this pile of either sand and gravel or one or the other right on the shore of the Otter River. So we're thinking, land use has the potential to possibly impact water quality. And so then just putting on the layer of open space protected land, in the corridor where the Otter River is impaired, there isn't any protected open space. So you really take a look. This area of the well protection zone doesn't have any. And then this corner with Gardner by the airport is also not protected, and it's in the well protection zone for the well that's just across. You can't really see it, but it's right there in Gardner. So considering land protection along the Otter River in the areas near the villages. And then water quality is not just important for Templeton, it's really a regional issue. So water quality of the Otter River will affect water quality of the Millers River to the north as it empties into it. And so teaming up with efforts of the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission and also the Millers River Watershed Council could be important. And then the next photo is just, I love this photo, it's of like the river rat race up in the Millers River. So we've just really gotten the sense that people around here care about the water for recreation. What's that?
No, I'm not tired. At least that day they had one.
Yeah. Right, maybe not all the time. But so Emma's gonna take a look at recreation on land.
So as you guys are probably aware, there's plenty of recreation opportunities in Templeton, including the different ball fields and access to the rivers or biking on the Ware River Rail Trail. But we found, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity tonight if you haven't already, to give us some more feedback on recreation and where those recreation opportunities are on the maps at this station, because we're finding that we need a little bit more feedback about that. But at our first meeting, we found that there was a desire for improved connectivity of hiking and biking trails. So we looked at that more specifically and found that there are 3 major systems of formal trails maintained by the DCR, and those are mapped in red. And then we also included the protected open spaces because a lot of those areas probably contain unmapped or unmarked trails that we aren't aware of or we don't have mapped. So we put all of those together and highlighted them. And then it's also good to highlight the Ware River Rail Trail and how that provides access to a lot of these places, with the slight interruption of Route 2 where people have to go out of their way to get onto the highway. But it's a great asset and it connects a lot of the areas. But some of the major patterns that we saw from this map are that there's a lack of hiking and biking trails in East Templeton. And that's probably largely because it's the most developed area. And then in South Templeton, there are patches of conservation areas that probably have hiking trails, but there's also a lack of connectivity between them. So if the town was looking to establish or connect trails, these are the areas to probably focus on. And then we also took a quick look at agricultural preservation because we've heard that it's very important. Unfortunately, we don't have data that's incredibly up to date. We're using data from 2005. There is a farmland inventory that's currently happening, and so we're waiting on some of that data. But this map is from 2005 and it shows the open agricultural areas in orange, and then the prime farmland soils and farmland of statewide importance in yellow. And so we found that about 4% of the landscape in Templeton in 2005 was farmland, and about 75% of that it was protected somehow. Either it was within the Chapter 61A, or it was under permanent protection with an agricultural preservation restriction. And so we realize that this is an important component of the rural character, and we're wondering how it might change or might be preserved in the future. We have an example of Dwelly Farm, which is currently owned by the North County Land Trust, and that has the potential to be a community farm, and we're exploring different options of how Templeton might preserve agriculture in the future if it's not able to be passed down through the generations as it has been. Just some of the patterns of this, it's fairly scattered throughout. The orange open agricultural areas are fairly scattered throughout. A lot of the unprotected agricultural soils are in East Templeton or Northeast Templeton. But one of our questions is, what is it about the agriculture that is really important? Is it protecting soils that have the potential to be used, or is it protecting areas that are already actively being farmed? Is it mostly a visual component of keeping a rural agrarian landscape? So those are kind of some of the questions that we're looking to have answered.
Yeah, and we're also, in our last community meeting, we asked Templeton residents to place stickers on the special places that they value. And so this is a simplified map of that map. And the larger the heart, the more votes that area received. And it showed us that Templeton residents really value this scenic natural areas such as the farmland in the south, ponds, forest areas. And then when you're looking at all the votes on the biggest hearts are located, that they really value the open spaces within or near their village centers, as well as the TBC lands. And so we're looking for opportunities to connect people to these places, and also looking for opportunities to create more open space in the villages. And then this is a map showing, and the stars are all the historic sites. And Templeton has a lot. They have over 300 historic sites that are listed in the National Registry of Historic Places, and they're considered American cultural resources worthy of protection. So, and they can be anything: cemeteries, stone walls, wells, and buildings and farms. So there's a lot in Templeton, but there's a lot, they're mostly clustered though in the villages, and they also coincide with people's most cherished places. So we're looking at protecting open space within these historic areas to give the residents places to gather so they can appreciate their cultural heritage.
So that was the final analysis that we're going to go over for this evening. And now we'd like to transition into thinking about how to make decisions for land protection in the future. And then later we'll get to our recommendations based on these analyses. So keep these in the back of your mind. We'll go over a summary of them. But now we're going to talk about decision making in the future.
Yeah, so when we were looking at land and how to prioritize the land, and how to recommend Templeton in the future when we're gone, how they're going to prioritize land to protect. We were looking at the qualities of the land to consider would be: is it valuable regionally and locally? Is it an environmental resource? Is it adjacent to conservation lands in other towns? Does it expand connections regionally or locally to other recreational trails? Does it protect drinking water? Is there scenic views? Is it near or within historic areas? Does it have agricultural features, like prime agricultural soils? Or is a portion of the land actively in use with agriculture? And does this piece of land have access to water? So these are qualities you were considering that would actually make that piece of our area, a higher priority. And also, in addition, we thought of, does this piece of land have a potential for education and tourism? Does it, is it, you know, in an underserved neighborhood in respect to open space? And, you know, or does it, is there potential to clean up if the cost is low enough to, you know, clean up a polluted site and reuse it? So these are all these qualities that we were considering. So we need your help now with this first activity to, you know, rank what, out of all these qualities, what's the most important to you in prioritizing land? So, yeah, so you can see here, if you could rank them vertically, one to six. 6 being the most important, and feel free to use like the same number if there's some qualities that have equal importance. So you could use, you know, number 1 many times. And then also, if you can, horizontally in the different categories of that, you know, recreation, there's like passive or active.
So 6 feet. What?
Yeah.
Yeah,
6 is the most important?
I think it's written at the top. What does it say?
Oh,
One
right.
is
This one
most
says
important.
1 is the most,
One
oh,
is
okay.
the
most
Sorry about
important.
that, I got it wrong. So 6 is the least important.
Feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
Take home homework, or we have to do it in class?
What do you mean by interior forest? Do you mean something surrounded by development as an interior forest, or?
Yeah, so it would be any large tract of forest where it's just a large area of undeveloped land, because there are some species that rely on that where it's not fragmented by a road or a housing development. So it doesn't have to be specifically surrounded by any type of development, but it's just a large tract of forest.
Oh yeah, so 1 being the most important, you can then link the, or rank within, yeah.
That ranking 1, 2,
Yeah.
1.
Yeah, well, these only have 2,
Oh,
so
I
it'd
see.
be 1
So
or
one,
2.
so these are one.
Yeah,
Okay,
you
all right.
really can't decide, you can't prioritize, you could give them both 2s or 1s. It gives us a sense of how you're valuing them. But if you can rank them 1, 2, 3.
Sounds like a pass.
Everyone's doing well.
Did you already fill yours out? So yeah, so one is the most important priority, and you can use one, you can use any number many times. Yeah, so if, does anybody want to tell us what they think is the most important qualities to consider when acquiring, protecting, or maintaining land in Templeton?
Water quality.
Yeah, I had to say water also.
Yeah, me
Because
too.
so many things are important, but water
Yeah,
is
water.
vital.
Water's a commodity.
So that's three people, and I heard you throw in the word quality, Steve, too. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by?
Well, if the water's polluted, your homes, right?
I'm thinking about it in terms
So,
of.
and Templeton has so much water, we're so wet for being up so high, it should be an asset to us. So how do we make it an asset? And keep the water quality high, And a lot of people like me, we're on wells. So I want good water quality. I don't like people up the street from me dumping stuff in the land next to mine.
Well, touching on that, the whole, like you mentioned, the Otter River, really polluted from the Gardner line to the Winchland line. And that we should also be looking into as a town, try to clean it up, mitigate the issue we have.
I think it has improved greatly
Oh, it has.
over
Yes,
the
I
last
agree.
20 years.
It's a long way to go.
Yeah,
with
oh
our-
yes.
what's
There's
in
still
it.
more tires.
Right, oh yeah, and the PCBs, real bad.
Does anybody want to add to the water or have any other important qualities to consider?
I think more access to that river is a key part of the town, requires that. And then the state has a lot of the Lake Dennis and all the land around northern part of the town blocked off with the state with all the gates nowadays. I understand where they're coming from, but it's like they're blocking off all the places where we have access to all these waterways and some of the woods you can't even access them anymore.
Yeah, so it's not only access to points where we don't have access, but getting access back where we used to have it.
Right,
You know,
correct.
state and federal lands that are blocked. you
Right.
know.
That's not allowed. All of a sudden now there's big gates up everywhere.
Priority?
I guess I have a question for our team. Do you think this would be a time to ask for more specifics on places, or should we hold off on that till we get to recommendations?
I think we'll hold that.
Okay. Okay, so it's been noted.
That-
We'll get
that's
back to it.
coming.
Yeah, and I actually, I got a couple of places over there, I marked them with stickers.
Oh.
I think one of the reasons that we have limited access to our water resources is the fact that vandalism is a big problem.
I agree.
I don't know whether we can do anything about that through education or, that's something probably this plan necessarily, but we have to find some way of managing that as well.
There's a lot of gates put up in town that, other than vandalism, it's like they just stopped it. I agree with the vandalism, people are dumping things, a lot of dumping land, dumping trash, wherever. But on the other side now, nobody can access that land.
That's right.
A lot of people used to access it, enjoy it, now they
Penalizes
close it all
every-
off and now
I think a lot of these things are tied together, scenic resources, farming for open pastures, I mean, I think it's general,
Overlap,
they're
yeah.
all connected, and I think, to me, that's a big part of it, is to keep, it's nice to have waterways that aren't full of houses, it's nice to have fields and forests that are open and stay open. I mean, it's great to see a logging operation come in and done sustainably, and then know that the forest will regrow rather than growing a subdivision or something. So using the land is good, as long as it's done in a sustainable fashion and, you know, preferably not to, you know, we know there's gonna be growth and development and, you know, the town has done some things like cluster zoning, you know, that has not been taken advantage of yet, but cleaning up the, you know, focusing on where the development is now is good, because we've got a lot of foreclosed houses that still need to be reused before they use up land. So keeping open land is very important to me.
Open land everywhere.
So one thing that, I mean, what we're really trying to get at with asking you these questions is, if we were to come up with a scoring system to make decisions about choosing parcels in the future, how would you weight some of these qualities over others? Like when you put a 1 next to the most important one, would you, so we're looking for how to maybe set up a decision-making model. And so what are some of the other qualities of land that you would weight higher than others?
I think you've done a nice job on a couple of different areas, you know, identifying the ecological resources that are not presently protected, and I think that should be weighted, you know, highly, because we do need to think, you know, regionally more than just, you know, in our own little area, and then the connectivity of the trails in the land. So I think both connectivity and ecological resources should get significant weight, and that we need to think of the big picture, like you guys are looking at 200 years from now. You know, things that we do now will have an impact. I mean, you know, it's just like fluoride your water. You might have it in there, but they might keep asking every year, and then some years they'll get it out. Same thing with open land. As soon as it's developed, it's gone. So you got to have a plan.
I think another thing that you have to take into consideration, especially if you're, you know, in the land trust, we're often offered pieces of land and you can't take them all. So you look at what land is, not only is it valuable, but what land is at risk. And not all parcels have a risk. You know, they're, maybe even if they're not perpetuity protected, they're still fairly safe from being developed or from being misused. So then you have to look at some of the properties that you are more worried about going into inappropriate housing, or you know, or maybe you need to do something to protect those because they're at risk. So I think that's got to be in your model when you're doing a hierarchy for what's important.
Yeah, I mean, if we had that as a separate, additional ranking was, what's the threat of development of that scene of historic, ecological area? Is it high, moderate, low in risk? So
Versus some of the opportunities, maybe there's not a threat, but maybe there's a really good opportunity.
Yeah, and you don't, I mean, it's, models are great, but the reality is that, you know, sometimes you get a lot of offers and sometimes you get none. So sometimes you think some property that may be better to protect is just not available to you at the time. So you might protect something that's lesser.
are there any of these qualities that anybody feels are most at risk? Most at risk.
At risk. Threat. Threat.
Yeah, it seems to me like the water quality, which you said is the most important, is maybe also at high risk.
We talk about the Otter River with the PCBs and the proximity of the wells, town water wells, to the Otter River. That's an important thing, not to forget. The Otter River is not helpful.
Here's a quick question for you. In terms of water quality, does it change your use of, or others who you know of, change people's use of the water for boating, swimming, fishing?
Swimming, yeah, we don't swim. Boating is still, I don't know about fishing either. I don't know if if they stock it anymore. They used to stock the upper or the southern part from like Otter River south. And I'm not sure if the state stocks it any further this way because of the quality of the water.
Did anybody see any quality that is missing from this criteria?
On recreation use, it appears that there's lots of individual types of usage for recreational things, like the trails and things, but I'd like to see large, real open spaces for festivals, because people do come to Templeton for that. And the space in the center is not big enough. Gilman White Field is not big enough. The Temple Stewart area is not big enough. There's no parking. You know, but if you want to attract opportunities, you need some place to go. And then that's what I mean by open space.
Large area for festivals and also parking.
Yes.
That's a great spot.
Yeah.
Gilman Way is pretty good.
Is there parking, enough parking?
If
Even
it were
here-
done
even-
well.
Even here, it's not enough parking.
No, no.
So if the next parking is also another.
Festivals and park.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because, I mean, we do have a beautiful common, and we have some events there annually that are very well attended, especially when the weather is good, but it becomes a real nightmare for parking, and there could be more space, and so if some of the lands, you know, if more open land in the village center was made available for that type of other use, that would make it a much better experience, and that's actually quite an economic boon to the town as well,
It
because,
is.
you know, it's the scholarships that are raised, but also the business that it attracts and things, so, you know, that we don't have a big core of employers here, so anything that we can do to bring interest in, that brings in revenue, you know, helps the town.
So you're thinking specifically about the area around the common in Templeton
Certainly in
Center?
Templeton
And
Center
anywhere.
is a great
Anywhere.
idea, but
Like the Temple Stewart area would be nice because, you know, nobody's gonna live on it. And if it was a little bigger for parking and things, that'd be great.
Temple Stewart.
Yeah, that's that, area of a polluted site.
it's a big fence.
One of them.
Area that's open bankruptcy.
Mm.
Yeah, that's one of
Fencing
the
up
biggest
there.
problems we have, is everything that's tied up in American tissue and, you know, bankrupt. Something needs to happen, and we know it's a long process, but if it doesn't start, it'll never end.
Mhm.
You know, and then Templeton Development Center.
Yes.
Templeton home or adjacent, that is in Templeton, would be ideal for something like that. Great, it's away from the villages, but.
Still,
Right off of Route 2 as well.
yeah.
And then we can keep it open space, because that's
Right.
another big worry we have to worry about is Templeton, that area there. Some people get that, so that can be almost.
I agree. I'd
Oh,
love to see that stay open. I think
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an important piece in Templeton, in my opinion, that Templeton,
It
that
is.
residents should be keeping an eye on and not letting someone get in there and develop it and make money
Right.
off it.
Right.
Keep it an open space.
Should we move on to the recommendation or?
That's a great lead-in. Thank you for
You're
that.
welcome.
We're gonna go over some of our draft recommendations. They are, we'll go over quickly just a summary of some of these analyses that we've done. So in the northwest, we see the Templeton Development Center land. It really embodies a lot of the rural character that we've been talking about all night, with historic sites and beautiful landscape, scenery, and farmland. And so, but there, as you said, are parcels that are potentially under the threat of development. So that is one area that we've looked at. And then in the south, we identified that there were patches of conservation land where there are potentially trails but a lack of connectivity. And then also potentially, or there's also large patches of unprotected habitat. And then in East Templeton, we have areas, an area that's developed, but a gap in the availability of maybe walking trails, or we've now heard parking, so there's a potential need for more passive recreation near population centers. And then lastly, we've overlaid the zone where water protection is an issue, where aquifers are vulnerable to contamination by land use and where the Otter River is impaired. And so our draft recommendations are coming in two parts. First, we'll go over the spatial and then the non-spatial, and we'd really like to generate some more ideas about the non-spatial. And we'd also like to emphasize that the spatial are not yet parcel specific, so as you look at our maps, just realize that they are not delineated by ownership yet. Katie,
So the first recommendation is the land of the former Templeton Developmental Center. It's owned by the Fernald Corporation, and there are certain areas that amount to almost 500 acres. So this is a sizable opportunity. As we've already talked about, this area embodies so many things related to the town's character. There's old historic agricultural buildings that are on the historic registry. There's a legacy of agriculture up there. Now the activities of the TDC have stopped, I think, for the most part. But there's people leasing land, and so agriculture continues to some extent. So potential for that to continue in a variety of different ways. As well as you mentioned festivals, and so the Fern Call Fair had been going on up there for 50 years. And this is a place that has the infrastructure to really support many people going up there on roads that are not very much traveled locally, for fairs, for festivals, as well as to get up there to use the existing trail hiking infrastructure. So we think there's so many opportunities up here.
So what is the red land up there?
This is an approximate delineation of the parcels that were determined to be under ownership of the Fernald Corporation, and that was a recent dispute between the state and the Fernald Corporation, and so they're not permanently protected. They're the parcels that are potentially.
And the rest of it,
developed.
much of it is owned by the state, and some of which was protected by the Acts of 2002, which is agricultural, but any protections that they had put on land that the state thought they owned, where that protection was eliminated when it was determined that this corporation actually owns the land. So it does seem pretty at risk.
Secondly, we recommend protecting lands between the protected open spaces in southern Templeton for ecological connectivity and availability of hiking trails and more recreation. And then also in that general area, we'd like to highlight the protection of the wetland core that's near the airport. It's a really large piece of important habitat. It's 469 acres, and it supports 3 species of concern, and it's within a well protection zone for a well that's in Gardner, and it's also not far from a lot of the trail systems in Hubbardston, so there's also recreational potential.
Yeah, and then we also agree with the current zoning that Templeton should concentrate development into the village centers. It's a smart growth strategy to create walkable communities. It expands economic opportunities, and it also helps preserve the farmlands and the critical habitat areas and the more rural areas of Templeton. So, but there is like a tension between concentrating development into this area and then also making sure there's enough open spaces in that densely populated area, which was lacking as our analysis showed. And so so we are also recommending that Templeton establish protected open spaces within trail village centers. And so it's important for open space to be in village centers because it helps the residents enjoy the village, enjoy nature, exercise, have recreational opportunities, and it creates more comfortable, livable urban areas and enhances the community's quality of life. So the land should be prioritized before the next development boom, and so because opportunities may be lost to create parking, gathering spaces, and parks and trails in these areas. And in general, we honed in on an area behind the historical district in Templeton. There's a large tract of forest there, and so that could preserve the scenic charm of Templeton Center and offer a lot of opportunities for the people in Templeton. And then we also recommend that Templeton protect Depot Pond and the area around it, and that also could offer a lot of recreational opportunities.
So those are, this is a summary map of all of our spatial recommendations. And now we're going to go into, and protecting these areas potentially protects that rural character that we've been talking about. So we'll go now into some of the non-spatial recommendations. And our first one would be to add some trail system signage. Some examples might be signs along the Ware River Rail Trail pointing to Dwelly Farm. So areas where there's access that people might not know about yet. Secondly, inventory and map trail systems. It might encourage people to come visit more often if they know where trail systems are, where they can go hiking. Education and maybe mapping of historical sites so that people know where to visit those. Review zoning and revise if necessary to support smart growth. And fifth, create task forces that are specific for the objectives within the OSRP, and then identify one member of those to forge community partnerships. So specifically putting an emphasis on reaching out to our neighbors and seeing how we can work together to accomplish these things. So those are all of the recommendations.
Yeah, and so if you just want to take a minute to look at the recommendations, and then we can have a discussion about what any feedback that you have, if you like any, or if you think they should be changed, if you think we need to include more.
So take a minute, and there's a comment box on the top of the back page. Write down any comments you have about the recommendations, and then in just a minute we'll talk about them.
We're going to take that second sheet from you at the end. We really want to read your feedback. So it's both for you to just kind of process this and make notes, but also we want to get those at the end.
Maybe ask the question, how do we get to them?
Or maybe just this one. Yeah, I know. Thanks. Perfect. I just need one more. I just think
Does anybody, are there any of these recommendations that you feel are that you like the most?
Regarding the development in the village centers, it would be nice to kind of have like an historic district, which could most likely be the common in Templeton, maybe a business district, and maybe a shopping or tourist district. Like, you know, we have a number of antique shops, you know, maybe concentrate on those kind of stores to attract people to town. And then you could have like a farming and farming and agricultural area. Maybe something like Dewey Farm could become an old Sturbridge Village or something.
Did you like the recommendation that they should have more open space in the village?
Depends on your idea of open space.
Yeah.
I think we have different definitions.
There isn't much open space
Yeah.
around any of the villages.
Right.
All of them.
Open space can be anything. It has opportunity. It can be, you know.
Future open
Yes.
space.
Future.
I think protecting the TDC should be a top
That is
priority.
the very
Absolutely
most
number one.
important. And get it away from Boston politics. Because
Yep.
they're gonna decide for us and then they come and tell us.
Where are they from?
Yeah, they don't pay any attention. And the snakes are a great example.
Oh.
So this would be a great time to generate ideas of how that might happen and who might be involved. Any ideas?
Well, I think the State Fish and Wildlife, you know, would be a great owner of a big block of that land, and it fits their mission to have it open for, you know,
Yeah.
hunting and fishing. I like the idea of keeping it as, you know, the agricultural fields available for lease, but I think it would be better if that the town did that than the state. But as far as the land that's potentially at risk, I think that, you know, working with the ownership to see if there might be a path towards the town seeking a state grant to purchase the land or the development rights using perhaps Community Preservation Act funds could work. You know, obviously that's a lot of money for that, but, you know, you gotta have a discussion, so. There's been some discussions and, you know, it'd be nice if the town was on the same page, but even just getting the townspeople to agree.
Former Senator Brewer locked that in for the farming area. Now Senator Goby, maybe that's another avenue to push her towards taking another step further than what Brewer did.
Yeah, so what Brewer did, protected the fields up there, but then they found out they didn't necessarily own them all, so that got all taken off.
But we still own some. or-
Yeah, so there's still 2,000 acres up there that are owned by the state, so I'd love to say working with the state is a good idea, but I don't know how to do it.
Right, I mean,
So is there any of these recommendations you would change?
I also like protecting the wetland core near the Gardner Airport. I mean, that's just a big old swamp anyway.
Yeah, I
So
know.
you'd think it would be doable by the owners.
well, early on, you mentioned that the whole East Templeton area, maybe we should be looking into that as well. That's not being, there's nothing there as far as open space or anything that's protected, right?
Which area are you thinking of exactly?
Well, it sounded like from the East Templeton to Otter River corridor was open, there's nothing.
It's all gravel banks.
Right. But we just have to keep going. How long, when do you stop that?
Yeah.
Talk about water quality, take all the filthy material away from the water,
Yeah.
stuff with clay.
One family owns it all, so.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
or like, you know, what was the former Edgewater Pond, you know, that's something I noticed didn't come up at our last meeting, how great it would be if that could be rebuilt, but, you know, even just getting it protected, I don't think the land there, I mean, it's not really at risk for development, but, you know, that would be a great place, it's a great, a lot of wildlife and stuff.
Route 2 kind of-
Nye Wilson's, it used to be called Edgewater.
Years ago, there was a movement, we're talking 40 years ago or so, where they were gonna try to dredge those ponds out again and
Yes.
make them back to what they once were. Route 2 kind of slammed that all up, and then it kind of fell apart.
Well, we also did have money from the state and the grant and the whole bit until they got investigating and they were surveying and all, and they found 2 endangered weeds. That ended everything. They had to get the water rights from Kyle and Coyote. They got those, everything was set to go until the blasted weeds came up.
So that's actually one thing that we're curious to learn more about. If hypothetically, if you could do anything with Edgewater Pond, what would you guys like to do with it?
Put the dam back in
Put
so
the
that
dam
the
back
water
in.
would stay in and clean out the weeds, you know.
Maybe more accessible like a swimming area or something
Well,
like that.
that's what I was hoping, because years and years ago, they used to swim down by the dam.
Right.
So I was going to continue with swimming lessons until it was rebuilt. Well, then the weeds came in and that was it.
Does it seem like of all the places that could be focused on to improve in whatever ways would be needed for swimming, that might be the best spot in town?
Well, we do have several other spots that are very good, so nobody has pushed for this, but it would be good. The land is over by Farr's house, is still open to
Right.
get to the dam, and
And
the dam,
access, I think it's a public access to the
yes,
line there.
I'm sure it is. It's been encroached on a bit by, yes, that's good.
You know, being right off of the highway on the first exit, coming westbound into Templeton, would be beautiful to have a pond there where you can someone can rent kayaks and canoes, and, you know, a lot of people stop in Templeton, I think, there to gas up or use the bathroom at Cumbies. And, you know, what if something was there and you had some shops around the pond too, and a path to go around, it would be wonderful.
Years ago, that's how it was.
That's what it was.
Edgewater was actually
Yeah.
at the end of Lake Avenue, wasn't that the end of Lake Avenue?
Yeah.
There was a
The-
swimming
Both
area.
sides of
Yeah,
2A
both
were
sides.
water.
Yeah,
Sides.
there's actually, the pond is, I believe it's first pond, it's
First pond,
on
yeah.
the highway.
Right.
Second pond is on Hootela's side, and third pond is the other side of the street where Wilson's is.
Right.
But there's,
And there is access there, I mean, down the road, of course, that takes some.
That would certainly help to revitalize that area.
That'd be perfect for something like that,
I
it's
don't know
already
if I want
there,
it
it's already been
revitalized.
used,
I
it's
just want
50
it
years,
done.
60 years ago.
no one homeless if people in stores.
And what about the Otter River swimming hole?
Yeah, that was another one too, that.
Yeah, that was a great
That
place.
was nice.
Right?
And that's all
Small.
spring fed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You
yeah.
know,
Someone tried to
so cool.
get that going a couple of years back, and it just put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it just didn't materialize.
No.
There's another one.
Yeah.
And
What-
then, and Baldwin's was
Otter
always
River.
Depot Pond.
Yeah, that Depot, the only problem with Depot, you get all the railroad track, right there, you really can't access it that well.
But isn't that property privately owned?
Depot Pond, wasn't it part of the?
Oh, not Depot Pond, the Outer River Pond,
No,
No?
that's conservation land,
is it?
down of Templeton.
Did you have a sense of what the obstacles were when that person or people tried to? get
Just
those ponds?
lack of funding, I don't know why.
Yeah.
So it was then declared an unsafe dam, and so they actually replaced some of the boards and built the water up, and then everything was good, and then everybody neglected it, and then there was concern downstream, and so they removed it.
Right,
So it really wasn't an engineered thing, it was an ad hoc thing.
Yeah, right, people getting together trying to,
Yeah,
it was a good job.
but it was
Right.
beautiful when it was working.
Yeah.
Are there any other areas that we missed, or?
You were talking about Depot Pond,
Deep-
is there anywhere that's open to the public there?
Well, up behind the, I'm not sure if they have access to it.
The Depot Pond, you actually would have would connect the area up at the housing development.
Right, that's
and up
coming
through
from
the
that.
cemetery. And
Right.
there could be some walking trails down there, and you could use that pond as well for some recreation. It wouldn't be good for swimming, but you probably could use it for kayaking or paddleboards or something of that nature. It would give Baldwinsville Center some recreational area. And also the river trail. You know,
Well, there's the kayak and canoeing
Right,
around the Otter River
yeah.
as well. They put all the gates up, they won't let anybody go in there. They kind of,
you know.
the state come in and,
But there's even like walking along the river, you know, on the paper mill land, you know, there's trails through there for walking that are not known, like if you went out Liberty Street and
yeah, there's a trail.
you can walk all the way to the,
It's about a mile walk, it's a nice walk. Yeah.
You know, the town, is, I think, are they using CPC money for that park in Baldwinville? Where, what,
Yeah.
Elm Street was?
yeah, so what's called Veterans Park now, you know, that was, you know, there was an old building there that the town had, and it was condemned and asbestos laden. So it's taken down, and so now it's a park. It's really not access to the river because it's a treacherous spot, but that's a great place, and there has been discussion about putting some signage in there that talks about the industry that was along the river, because there were all kinds of factories there that got washed out, and so,
And you
figuring
can
out how
hike
to use that
You
park.
can hike that trail in the back right up into
Back
the
Bay.
Birch Hill area. It's really quite pretty. You can even see the footings of the old factories in there.
All along that, all the way up
Yeah.
Trout Brook as well.
So it'd be good to have marked trails, I think.
Right there.
Right.
There you go.
And any other recommendations?
So one of the things that we were talking about with the preventing of access, I think getting to 3 pipes is the most important one, because that used to be the place to launch your canoe or kayak to get down to the, you could go down to the Birch Hill Dam. Now you've got to slug, you know, you got to walk about a half a mile to get there, or you make an access by the pumping, the pump station there, upstream, where, you know, the bridge goes in.
What is that place that you said that would be good for access?
What they call 3 pipes, which is where Trout Brook feeds into the Otter River.
Kind of where I was showing you put those things.
Oh, okay. All right.
So if the Army Corps won't open their gate, you know, maybe the town could actually just get access, you know, even cut a trail right where that pump station is. There is
It's not a
access.
comfortable, it's not a safe access really.
Right, it would
It's
have to-
general public, you wouldn't want to go through there to get it put in there. The general public.
You'd have to do some, yeah, or get to where you know, because the other place is blocked too.
Almost down by where they put the snowmobile bridge, there's probably
Yeah.
better access, but you gotta hike everything in because of the gates. It's already there, just let us
Yeah.
get into it.
We'll have to get you guys to look at the maps with us afterwards.
Yeah.
Or that if you could come into Back Bay,
Right,
you know, there's all those roads that go right to the river, but
that's true. And a place of parking access down there. 3 piping, no idea as far as parking and accessibility. Back Bay wouldn't be there, but I think.
yeah, I mean,
Well, how far is
Since there
3
is-
pipes from the Little League field?
Probably a quarter mile if that,
Well,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
straight down.
yeah.
Since we,
That's where Trout Brook comes in from Day Mill up behind the landfill, it comes down that way,
Oh.
underneath 202, and that's all part of, dumps into the Otter River.
since we don't have we don't have a lot of kids at the community meeting, is there any areas that would, you know, is there a need for more recreation in certain areas
I think East Hamilton needs
or?
playgrounds.
yeah, East Templeton, well, we've got Cottage Lane is the only place where there's anything for kids, and that is so mosquito infested that nobody wants to go there.
What is that place?
Cottage Lane in East
Kermit
Templeton.
Coleman Memorial Field, it's called. is it?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right, isn't it? I
Yeah.
forgot all about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So no one really goes there? It's too many mosquitoes?
Well,
Just have-
Actually,
People
the
walk
neighbors
the dog.
do, but, you
Still
know.
wet, is it?
They used to
Yeah,
play ball
it's
there.
wet. There was a ball field there, but it's awful wet
Some
ground.
teams have soccer, baseball.
There again, all the
practices
town
there.
wells were up on High Street, and everything is flowing down. And it settles on field.
I think an important recommendation would be education, because like, if I didn't come here tonight, then I would have literally no clue about any of this. So I have the feeling that like,
Did you get
there's
hold
like
of
a lot of
Mike
people
and
that think the
Brian?
same way as
You
me.
did.
And so if more people knew about this stuff, like I'm all in, so I feel like other people would be in too. So I think education is important.
Or maybe at that point, we go to the high school, go to
Yeah.
high school, educate these people with their backing, we might get.
The school has an agricultural class or horticultural class, and I don't know if they still have an outdoors type of class.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. So they would be interested, I think, in learning a lot about this.
Yeah, we reached out to Mike Donofrio and Elise, I forget her last name, but both two teachers there who were really interested in, I think they shared the information with students. So, you know, this could be a beginning to continue to follow up with them.
It's all history, this is all history of the town. A lot of things there, like you mentioned earlier, these foundations along this way, this is all the factories and things of the town back in the late 1800s, 1900s, where that 38 kind of, Hurricane of 38
Right.
really took devastated this area.
And everything.
And the whole town changed, along this whole long river corridor.
And one other park that we really have struggled with access to is the Baker's Field, which really doesn't have good access, and you know, it's kind of like tucked away back there, so you wouldn't want to invest in much that could be damaged by vandalism, but there has been suggestion that that could be a place for people to take their dogs or something, like a dog park or something. But then we have to worry about the access situation and you know, maybe the abutters, you know, the Graves Corporation, maybe they would be interested in finding some way to help us. There is a right of way, there's a sewer pipe that goes out there, but you know, the only real access to drive there is through the City of Gardner's treatment plant. So otherwise it's just a landlocked parcel that's, you know, not available. Maybe it never will be, but it would be nice. Something could happen.
I was wondering if there is any interest in the dog park.
And we read somewhere too that maybe a skate park or.
They could use that if the school gets built.
Yeah.
Not
They
that
did.
skate
All
park.
the kids are trying to get
They
it.
don't know that national unit.
Yeah.
I think we're almost out of time, and so we wanted to wrap it up to make sure we got everyone to maybe say a sentence or a word or paint a picture of what describing what they see for Templeton in 20 years, or what they would like to see and where, or just anything you'd like to say about
I'd like to see some cooperation from everyone.
cooperation.
Yes. And
Be
volunteers.
realistic.
Yeah, well, I'm not very realistic. I believe in Santa Claus.
Rapid fire.
And I started to
I
fire,
just
now
want to
somebody
say,
put it out.
hearing all these things has made me feel more optimistic about the future.
Yeah, we really have to prioritize and identify some things, like, you know, through your process, but you gotta get something, so, you know, you protect it, it's protected forever. If you keep planning and trying and then nothing happens, and then, you know, money talks, you know, so, you know, moving it forward is gonna be important, getting the plan together. The plan will be good for like, it'll be like a 7-year plan, right? So we'll have 7 years to take advantage of this, to work on the goals and objectives, and hopefully use it to, you know, pursue some state funds to help us accomplish some of these things, like connecting the wildlife corridors, making better access, and working with the state.
And I think we should involve kids from
School.
grade 1, maybe not kindergarten, but at least grade 1, and get them involved. I don't know if Mike can do this with his kids in the high school, but the little ones have so much enthusiasm, and the parents will follow them, and that's always good too.
I think it's easy to get discouraged in this town, because sometimes it's political and annoying, but I think, you know, last week when I saw your presentation for the first time, it reminded me of why I like living here, why I think Templeton is good, why I want to stay, why I think it's beautiful, and why I think it's worth doing something for. So I think, like you said, optimism.
Yes.
I think we need industry in town,
Oh.
the areas that we have. The areas off of Route 2, where we have places
I know.
for industry, I think we should have industry. It's gonna help the town as a whole financially and bring more people into town for the good reason, for the right reasons, than,
I think we need somebody tenacious to take on the Temple Stewart property and
Yeah,
get that so it can be used.
right.
So maybe that's where our legislators can help us at least understand the process and get it rolling.
Yeah. You can't end until you start.
You know, pick up on industry too. I'd like to see smart growth like that, and we've got the parcels. I sit on the Economic Development Committee. We're looking at those parcels off of Route 2 especially, but we also talked about tying it into open space and having trails and, you know, preserving the quality of Templeton there. Just because you invite industry in doesn't mean that you're gonna trash the land, you know?
Right.
You want to preserve the land as well and have trails and show the beauty of the town there. So I think, you know, economic development and open space shouldn't be considered mutually exclusive of each other. They should work hand in hand.
Will this draft go to anyone besides the town of Templeton? You know, will it go to like people in the state?
Well, we have to get it approved. So once we get it, once it's completed, it has to go to the state for approval.
So all the boards, you know, the planning board, the board of selectmen, they'll all get copies of the draft, have a chance to weigh in, and so they're all on board, and then it'll get submitted for approval. As soon as we've submitted it, then we'll have it pending, and so if there was a grant opportunity, we would have one pending, so.
Right, it's a necessary piece if we want to get, if we want to share funds or get grant funds. So without it, we're not eligible for some.
Any other vision of Templeton that you would like to see?
I'd like to see it become a green community.
Green community?
And I thought that a few years ago that was impossible, but I'm starting to hear it be said more. And I think that, you know, and that opens yourself up for more grants, especially for open space.
You get one right away, too, right?
That's right.
Did you see that?
Huh? What?
So those of you who, I don't know, maybe everybody's aware, but a green community is an actual designation. If you become a green community, it's a lot like being the Community Preservation Act and things like that. So I think we are out of time, and I think we've run over just a little bit, so we want to thank you for all of your time and all of your feedback. If you want to stick around, we will be here, and we're happy to continue talking to you and looking at maps. All of this has been extremely valuable for us, so thank you so much for your time, and please stay involved, because you guys are the ones that are going to drive this forward into the future. So.
And reach out to us with any further comments. You think of something, just shoot us an email or give us a call. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you.
you.